The morning mist clung to the jade-green mountains like silk veils, but Princess Mei-lin could see through the deception. Beyond those peaceful peaks lay the kingdom of Tianling, ruled by the man she had been taught to hate since childhood. King Zhou-wei, the king of Tianling, slayer of her father's armies and destroyer of 3 border cities. She adjusted the grip on the ivory-handled dagger at her waist as she stood on the marble balcony of her tower in the palace of Yunhai Kingdom. At 23, Mei-lin was no longer the frightened child who had watched smoke rise from burning villages. She had spent 8 years training in the art of war, strategy, and assassination. Today, that training would finally serve its purpose. "Your Highness," came a soft voice behind her. "The delegation is ready to depart." Mei-lin turned to face her most trusted advisor, Master Chen, an elderly man whose weathered face bore the wisdom of decades spent in court politics. His eyes, however, held concern, the same concern he'd shown when she first proposed this mad plan 6 months ago. "You still believe this is folly?" she said, not really asking. "I believe," Master Chen said carefully, "that hatred makes for poor strategy. Your father—" "My father is dead because of that tyrant king," Mei-lin interrupted, her voice carrying the sharp edge of forged steel. "King Zhou-wei showed no mercy when he crushed our eastern provinces. He will receive none from me." Master Chen bowed his head. "As you wish, Your Highness. But remember, you are not just seeking vengeance. The survival of our kingdom depends on this mission." Mei-lin nodded grimly. The truth was bitter as winter wine. Yunhai Kingdom was dying slowly, strangled by Tianling's blockades and constant border raids. Her younger brother, now king since their father's death 2 years ago, was weak and preferred scholarly pursuits to warfare. The nobles whispered of surrender. The people suffered. This mission, disguised as a peace negotiation while she positioned herself to assassinate King Zhou-wei, was their kingdom's last hope. "The carriages are loaded with gifts," Master Chen continued. "Silk, jade, rare spices. Everything to convince King Zhou-wei that Princess Mei-lin comes in genuine pursuit of peace." "And my true purpose?" she asked. "Hidden in the false bottom of your personal chest. Poison from the shadow lotus, tasteless, odorless, and slow-acting. It will give you time to escape before—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Mei-lin touched the tiny vial sewn into the lining of her sleeve. One drop in King Zhou-wei's wine, and within hours, the tyrant would be dead. Tianling would fall into chaos without its strong leader, and Yunhai could reclaim its lost territories. "I am ready," she declared. But as she descended the marble stairs toward the courtyard where her retinue waited, Mei-lin felt the weight of destiny pressing upon her shoulders. She had spent so many years nurturing her hatred, feeding it with stories of Zhou-wei's cruelty, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to carry any other emotion. The journey to Tianling's capital would take 5 days, through mountain passes and river valleys. 5 days to prepare herself for the moment when she would look into the eyes of her greatest enemy and smile while offering him death in a cup. The palace of Tianling rose from the heart of the city like a mountain of black stone and gold, its curved roofs reaching toward heaven. As Mei-lin's procession passed through the outer gates, she was struck, despite herself,
by the palace's terrible beauty. Even the enemy, it seemed, could create wonders. The citizens who lined the streets to watch the Phoenix Princess arrive seemed well-fed and content, not the oppressed masses she had expected to find under a tyrant's rule. Children ran alongside the carriages, laughing, while merchants hawked their wares with genuine enthusiasm. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit.
His Majesty the King awaits you in the Hall of Celestial Harmony, announced the palace herald, a middle-aged man in robes of midnight blue silk. His Majesty extends his welcome and hopes your journey was pleasant. Mei-lin forced her expression into a mask of diplomatic courtesy. Please, convey my gratitude to His Majesty, she replied. The Phoenix Kingdom comes in friendship. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. The Hall of Celestial Harmony was a vast chamber, dominated by pillars carved with intertwining dragons and phoenixes, an irony that might have made her laugh if her mission weren't so deadly serious. Courtiers in rich silks stood along the walls, their faces curious but guarded. At the far end of the hall, upon a throne of white jade and black lacquer, sat the man she had come to kill. King Zhou-wei was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30 years old, with strong shoulders and hands that looked more suited to wielding a sword than holding court. His black hair was bound in a top knot secured with a jade pin, and his robes were surprisingly simple for a king. Deep blue silk, embroidered with silver dragons. But it was his eyes that struck her most forcefully. Dark and intelligent, they seemed to look directly into her soul with unsettling intensity. This was not the monster of her imagination. This was a man.
Your Majesty, Mei-lin said, performing the elaborate bow required by protocol. I am Mei-lin of Yunhai, and I bring greetings from my brother, King Wei-ming. Zhou-wei rose from his throne, and she was surprised again by his grace as he stepped down to meet her at the center of the hall. Princess Mei-lin, he said warmly, your reputation precedes you. As a scholar, a strategist, and a woman of great beauty, I see the stories did not exaggerate. Heat rose in her cheeks despite her determination to remain unmoved.
You honor me, Your Majesty, she replied. Please rise, Zhou-wei said with genuine courtesy. We need not stand on such formality when discussing matters of peace between our kingdoms. His voice was warm, cultured, with none of the harshness she had expected from a conqueror. I have had chambers prepared for you and your retinue. Tonight we shall feast in your honor, and tomorrow we can begin our negotiations. Your Majesty is most gracious, Mei-lin replied, though inwardly she was calculating. A feast tonight. Wine would flow freely. It could be the perfect opportunity. As if reading her thoughts, Zhou-wei smiled. I hope you will find our Tianling wine to your taste, he said. We have a vintage from the western valleys that pairs beautifully with mooncakes. I look forward to sampling the famous hospitality of Tianling, she said, her hand unconsciously moving toward the hidden vial in her sleeve. Mei-lin's chambers were more luxurious than her rooms in her own palace. Silk hangings in peacock blue and gold, furniture of polished rosewood, and windows that overlooked a garden of flowering jasmine. As evening approached, her maidservants helped her dress for the feast in a gown of phoenix red silk that made her pale skin glow like pearls. She checked the poison vial one last time, ensuring it remained secure in her sleeve
then made her way to the banquet hall. The feast was magnificent. Course after course of delicacies: roasted duck with plum sauce, steamed fish with ginger, vegetables carved into the shapes of flowers, and sweet rice wine that seemed to capture moonlight in every cup. Mei-lin sat at the high table beside King Zhou-wei, maintaining pleasant conversation while waiting for the right moment. But as the evening wore on, something unexpected happened. She found herself genuinely engaged by Zhou Wei's conversation. He spoke knowledgeably about poetry, philosophy, and the challenges of ruling a kingdom. He asked thoughtful questions about Yunhai's customs and seemed genuinely interested in her answers.
"Tell me, princess," he said during a lull in the music, "what do you think is the greatest responsibility of a ruler?" The question caught her off guard. She had expected political maneuvering, not philosophical discussion. To protect their people?" she answered carefully. "Yes," he agreed, his dark eyes serious. "But how does one balance protection with progress? Sometimes, to defend your people, you must make terrible choices. You must become the villain in someone else's story." There was something in his tone, a note of genuine anguish, that made her study his face more closely. "You speak as though you have experience with such choices," she observed. Zhou-wei was quiet for a long moment, turning his wine cup in his hands. "The Eastern campaigns," he said finally. "Your father's armies." Mei-lin's breath caught in her throat. Her hand moved instinctively toward the poison vial. "I know you hate me for those victories," Zhou-wei continued, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "I don't blame you. I would hate me too, in your position." "Then why?" she began, but he held up a hand. "Your father was a good man and a brave general, but he was being used by advisors who wanted war at any cost. They were prepared to sacrifice every soldier in Yunhai to weaken Tianling, even if it meant destroying both kingdoms in the process." "That's not true," Mei-lin said sharply. "Isn't it?" Zhou-wei's eyes met hers directly. "Who advised the Eastern campaign? Who convinced your father to refuse my offers of negotiation? Who profits from continued conflict between our kingdoms?" The questions hit her like physical blows. She thought of Master Chen's initial resistance to this peace mission, of certain nobles who had seemed almost disappointed by her diplomatic overture. But surely, "You're trying to manipulate me," she accused. "I'm trying to tell you the truth, though I understand why you wouldn't believe me. Words are cheap, Princess Mei-lin. But tomorrow, I want to show you something. Will you ride with me to the borderlands?" The poison vial seemed to burn against her wrist. This was not how she had imagined this evening would unfold. "Why would you want to show me anything?" she asked. "Because," Zhou-wei said, rising from his chair, "I believe that understanding is the first step toward peace. And I suspect that you, unlike some of your advisors, actually want peace rather than merely the appearance of it." He offered her his hand to help her rise from her chair. For a heartbeat, she stared at those strong, calloused hands, the hands of a warrior who had killed her father's soldiers, but also, somehow, the hands of a man who tended jasmine gardens and spoke of responsibility with genuine pain in his voice. Against her better judgment, she took his hand. The ride to the borderlands took most of the morning. Mei-lin rode her favorite mare, a spirited bay named Phoenix. while Zhou-wei rode a black stallion that seemed to match his elegant yet powerful bearing. They were accompanied by a small guard escort, but the king had insisted on keeping the party small. "Where exactly are we going?" Mei-lin asked, as they crested a hill overlooking a valley dotted with small farming villages. "To see what your father's war really accomplished," Zhou-wei replied grimly. They descended into the valley, and as they drew closer to the villages, Mei-lin began to notice details that made her stomach clench with unease. These were not Tianling settlements. The architectural style, the way the fields were arranged, even the dialect she could hear when they passed close enough to farming families, all marked these as displaced citizens of Yunhai. "Refugees," Zhou-wei explained, seeing her recognition. "Nearly 10,000 of them from the eastern provinces. When the war came to their lands, they had nowhere else to go." "But they're living on Tianling's soil," Mei-lin said, confusion in her voice. "Yes," Zhou-wei confirmed. "We've been providing land, tools, seed grain, and protection for 2 years now." His tone was matter-of-fact, but Mei-lin detected an underlying current of something. Pride? Satisfaction? They grow food for both kingdoms now. The surplus helps feed Tianling's cities, while they keep what they need to live. Mei-lin stared at the thriving settlements. The people looked healthy. Their children played in the dusty streets. The fields were green with growing crops. These were her people, citizens of Yunhai, who had been given shelter by their supposed enemy. "Why?" she whispered. "Because they were hungry and homeless, and I had land and resources to spare. Come, there's someone I want you to meet." He led her to a modest house where an elderly woman sat in the shade, mending a fishing net. When she looked up and saw Zhou-wei, her weathered face broke into a genuine smile. "Your Majesty," she exclaimed warmly. "You honor our humble village." "Grandmother Wu, I've brought someone to meet you," Zhou-wei said gently. "This is Princess Mei-lin of Yunhai." The old woman's eyes widened and she struggled to rise, but Mei-lin quickly knelt beside her chair instead. "Please don't get up," Mei-lin said softly. "I'm honored to meet you." "Your Highness," Grandmother Wu said, studying Mei-lin's face with shrewd eyes. "You have your father's look about you. He was a good man, though perhaps not well advised in his final years." "You knew my father?" Mei-lin asked, surprise coloring her voice. "I lived in Dongshan village in the eastern province," the old woman explained. "When the war came," her face grew sad. "So many young men died on both sides. Your father included. Such a waste. But King Zhou-wei," Mei-lin began. "Saved us," Grandmother Wu finished firmly. "When Dongshan burned, when we had nothing left, King Zhou-wei's soldiers found us on the roads. We thought we would be killed or enslaved. Instead, they brought us here, gave us new homes, helped us plant new crops. My grandson serves in King Zhou-wei's army now, proud to protect both kingdoms." Mei-lin felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "Both kingdoms?" she asked weakly. Zhou-wei spoke quietly, but with conviction. "Many of the refugees chose to serve Tianling, but they do so knowing they're also protecting their birthland. Because the truth is, these border conflicts don't benefit ordinary people. They only serve those who profit from selling weapons, and those who cling to power by feeding fear." They spent the rest of the afternoon visiting the refugee settlements. Mei-lin met farmers, craftsmen, soldiers, merchants, all citizens of Yunhai who had been given new lives under Tianling's protection. More unsettling still, she met Tianling citizens who spoke of King Zhou-wei with genuine affection and respect, not the fearful obedience she had expected under a tyrant's rule. As they rode back toward the palace in the golden light of late afternoon, Mei-lin's mind churned with confusion. The poison vial in her sleeve felt heavier than ever, but now it burned with shame rather than righteous purpose. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked as the palace came into view. "Because tomorrow we begin negotiations that will decide whether our kingdoms find peace or keep bleeding each other to death," Zhou-wei replied seriously. "I need you to see what's really at stake. It isn't about pride or revenge or even territory. It's about people, your people and mine, who deserve more than to be pawns in someone else's game." "And you think I've been a pawn?" Mei-lin asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zhou-wei was quiet for a long moment. Then, gently, "I think you are wise enough to recognize the truth when it's before you, and strong enough to act on it. The question is whether you'll let hatred blind you to possibility or whether you'll help me build something better than what our fathers left us." That night, alone in her chambers, Mei-lin sat by the window, staring out at the jasmine garden. The poison vial lay on the table before her, catching the moonlight like a tiny star. She had come here to kill a monster, but the man she had met today was no monster. Complex, yes. A former enemy, certainly, but not evil. The sound of soft footsteps in the corridor made her quickly conceal the vial in her sleeve again. A moment later, there was a gentle knock at her door. "Come in," she called. To her surprise, it was Zhou-wei himself who entered, carrying a tea service. "I thought you might be having difficulty sleeping. The jasmine tea helps calm the mind," he said considerately. "Your Majesty, you shouldn't be serving tea personally," Mei-lin protested. "Perhaps not," he agreed, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "But I wanted to speak with you privately, and this seemed less formal than requesting an audience." He poured 2 cups of the fragrant tea and offered her one. "Besides, sharing tea makes conversation easier." Mei-lin accepted the cup, acutely aware of the irony. Here he was, offering her tea with the same trust she had planned to betray by poisoning his wine. "What did you want to discuss?" she asked. "Tomorrow's negotiations," Zhou-wei said, settling into the chair across from her. "I want to be completely honest with you about Tianling's position." He cradled his teacup thoughtfully. "We cannot continue like this. The border conflicts are draining both kingdoms. My advisors want a final campaign, one decisive war to end things permanently. But I don't want that. I want peace, Princess. Yet I cannot allow Tianling to be slowly bled dry. If we can't reach an agreement, then yes, I'll have no choice but to listen to my generals." "What kind of agreement did you have in mind?" she asked. "A true alliance," Zhou-wei said, his voice steady, persuasive. "Not just ending hostilities, but building something new together. Shared trade routes, joint patrols along the borderlands, stronger ties between our noble families. Something that proves to both kingdoms that cooperation brings more than conflict ever could." His dark eyes met hers over the rim of his teacup. "And I believe the strongest symbol of that alliance would be a marriage between our royal houses." Mei-lin's heart began to race. "You mean my brother and one of your sisters
Or cousins? She asked hesitantly. No, Zhou-wei said softly. I mean you and me.
The teacup slipped from Mei-lin's nerveless fingers, shattering against the stone floor in a shower of porcelain and jasmine-scented liquid. She stared at Zhou-wei in shock, unable to form words. I know it's unexpected, he continued, apparently unperturbed by her reaction. 6 months ago, I would have called anyone who suggested such a thing mad, but circumstances have a way of changing perspectives. You want to marry me? The words came out as barely more than a whisper. I want to save both our kingdoms, Zhou-wei corrected gently. Marriage between us would accomplish several things. It would cement a permanent alliance, it would end the succession disputes that fuel so much conflict, and it would show both our peoples that their rulers are committed to peace, not conquest. Mei-lin forced herself to think logically, despite the chaos in her mind. It was brilliant. Exactly the kind of marriage alliance that had united kingdoms throughout history. But the personal implications. And you believe that such a marriage could work? She asked carefully. Zhou-wei set down his own teacup and leaned forward slightly. I believe we're both intelligent enough to understand duty, he said thoughtfully. More than that, I find myself genuinely drawn to your mind, your spirit, and, yes, your beauty. I hope you might come to feel the same. Heat flooded Mei-lin's cheeks. She had been so focused on her mission of assassination, she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge the attraction she was beginning to feel toward this complex, thoughtful man. Even now, knowing he was her enemy, she felt the pull of his quiet confidence, his unexpected gentleness. This is all happening very quickly, she managed. Yes, it is, Zhou-wei had read. But sometimes the most important decisions must be made quickly. He rose from his chair and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit garden. I won't lie to you, princess. This marriage would be political at first, but I've seen royal marriages that began with nothing more than respect and grew into genuine partnership, even love. Love. The word hung between them like a bridge she was afraid to cross. How could she love the man she had come here to kill? How could she marry him while carrying poison meant for his heart? What would happen to Yunhai's independence? She asked, seizing on the practical. Nothing, Zhou-wei assured her. You would be queen of Tianling, but your brother would remain king of Yunhai. Our children would inherit both thrones, uniting the kingdoms in the next generation. Until then, the kingdoms remained separate, but allied. It was generous, far more generous than most conquerors would ever offer. Mei-lin thought of Grandmother Wu, of the thousands of refugees who had found new life under Zhou-wei's protection. She thought of her own people, slowly starving under endless war. A marriage alliance could save them, but it would mean abandoning vengeance. It would mean admitting she might have been wrong about this man. I need time to consider, she said finally. Of course, Zhou-wei replied with understanding. This is not a decision to be made lightly. He moved toward the door, then paused. May I ask you something, princess? Yes, she said cautiously. Why did you really come to Tianling? He asked, his voice perceptive. I don't believe it was merely to negotiate a trade agreement, as your proposal claimed. Mei-lin's hand moved instinctively to her sleeve, where the poison vial lay hidden. For a wild moment, she considered telling him the truth. But deception was a habit too deeply ingrained. I came because my kingdom is dying, she said, which was, at least, partially true. I came seeking a way to save my people. Zhou-wei studied her face for a long moment, and she had the unsettling sense that he saw more than she wanted him to. But all he said was, "Then perhaps we both came seeking the same thing, just by different paths." After he left, Mei-lin sat in the darkness for hours, staring at the broken teacup. Tomorrow she would have to choose between vengeance and something that might be hope. Between the girl who had nursed hatred for 8 years and the woman beginning to see the possibility of a different future. The poison vial pulsed against her wrist like a second heartbeat, reminding her of her original purpose. But more and more, that purpose felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone younger. Someone more certain of the difference between good and evil. Mei-lin rose before dawn and walked in the jasmine garden as the first light touched the palace walls. The flowers released their sweet perfume into the cool morning air, and she could hear birds beginning their morning songs in the branches of ancient pine trees. It was peaceful here, a sanctuary that seemed removed from the complexities of politics and war. She was not entirely surprised when Zhou-wei appeared on the garden path, also dressed for walking rather than court. Somehow, she had sensed he would be an early riser, someone who sought solitude to think clearly. "Good morning, Princess," he said with quiet warmth. "I hope you slept well." "As well as could be expected," she replied, which was truthful, if not completely informative. She had barely slept at all, her mind churning through possibilities and fears. "Would you like to walk with me?" Zhou-wei asked. "I find the garden helps clarify my thoughts." They fell into step together along the winding paths. For several minutes, neither spoke, but the silence was comfortable rather than tense. Mei-lin found herself studying Zhou-wei's profile in the growing light. The strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair caught glints of gold from the rising sun, the small scar along his left temple that spoke of old battles. "Tell me about your childhood," she said suddenly. "I know you became king young, but I know little else." Zhou-wei glanced at her with surprise. "Your childhood?" he asked. "That's an unexpected question." "I'm trying to understand you," Mei-lin admitted. If I'm to consider your proposal seriously, I need to know who you really are." They had reached a small pavilion overlooking a lotus pond. Zhou-wei gestured for her to sit on the stone bench, then settled beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I was 12 when my father died, too young to rule, but bold enough to understand that Tianling had many enemies who would see our moment of weakness as opportunity. My mother served as regent for 3 years, but the real power lay with the military council." "That must have been difficult," Mei-lin observed sympathetically. "It taught me early that a king's power depends entirely on the loyalty of those who serve him," Zhou-wei reflected. "Fear can compel obedience, but only respect and genuine care for your people's welfare can inspire true loyalty." His voice carried the weight of hard-learned lessons. "When I came to age and took full power, I had to choose what kind of ruler I wanted to be." "And you chose to be the kind who shelters enemy refugees?" Mei-lin asked pointedly. Zhou-wei was quiet for a moment, watching the morning light dance across the lotus pond. "I chose to be the kind who remembers that enemies are often just people who've been told different stories about the same events," he said thoughtfully. The words hit Mei-lin with unexpected force. How many stories had she been told about this man? How many of them might have been shaped by the storyteller's own agendas? "The Eastern campaigns," she said carefully. Tell me what really happened. Are you certain you want to know? Zhou-wei asked gently. The truth might be painful. Mei-lin thought of the poison vial hidden in her chamber, of 8 years spent honing her skills for this moment of vengeance. I need to know, she said firmly. Zhou-wei nodded slowly. Your father was indeed a good man and a brilliant general, he began. But in his later years, he was heavily influenced by a council of advisors who believed that Tianling was planning to annex Yunhai entirely. They convinced him that a preemptive strike was the only way to preserve your kingdom's independence. Were you planning to annex Yunhai? Mei-lin asked directly. No, Zhou-wei said firmly. We were planning to propose a mutual defense pact and expanded trade agreements. I had even drafted a marriage proposal, not between us, obviously, but between your brother and one of my cousins. Zhou-wei's expression grew grim. But your father's advisors intercepted my diplomatic envoy. They killed my ambassador and used his death as proof that Tianling intended war. Mei-lin felt cold, despite the warming morning air. You're saying my father was manipulated into attacking you? She asked, her voice hollow. I'm saying your father acted on the information he had available, Zhou-wei said carefully. Unfortunately, that information was designed to make war inevitable. Zhou-wei turned to face her directly. The campaigns that followed were bloody and terrible. I won them, but victory came at a cost I wouldn't wish on anyone. When it was over, I swore I would never again allow such waste of life from either kingdom. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with sickening clarity. Mei-lin thought of Master Chen's initial resistance to this peace mission, of certain nobles who had seemed almost eager for her to fail. She thought of the years spent training for vengeance against a man who might never have been her true enemy. The advisors who counseled my father, she said slowly, are they still influential in Yunhai's court? Some of them, Zhou-wei confirmed grimly, including, I believe, some members of your current delegation. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. She had been used, carefully manipulated from childhood to serve other people's agenda for war and profit. The hatred she had nursed so carefully had been planted and tended by those who benefited from conflict between the kingdoms. I've been such a fool, she whispered. You've been a loyal daughter and a patriotic princess, Zhou-wei corrected gently. There's no shame in that. But now you have the chance to choose your own path, based on truth, rather than carefully crafted lies. Mei-lin looked at this man, this supposed enemy, who had shown her more honesty in 2 days than her own advisors had shown in years. The attraction she had been fighting began to transform into something deeper and more dangerous, the beginning of genuine respect and affection. If I were to accept your proposal, she said carefully, what would happen to those who manipulated us both? Zhou-wei's expression grew hard. Justice, he said firmly. They would face trial for their crimes against both kingdoms. But that decision would be yours as much as mine. You would be my queen and partner, not merely a diplomatic prize. The word partner sent an unexpected thrill through her. She had never imagined marriage as a partnership of equals, but Zhou-wei seemed to be offering exactly that. I need to retrieve something from my chambers. There's something I must show you before I can give you an answer. Back in her chambers, Mei-lin stood before her dressing table, staring at the poison vial. Such a small thing, to carry the weight of so much hatred and misguided vengeance. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. She had asked Zhou-wei to meet her in the garden pavilion in an hour. That gave her time to prepare herself for what might be the most important conversation of her life. When she returned to the pavilion, she found him waiting by the lotus pond, scattering breadcrumbs to the ornamental fish. The simple, peaceful action made what she had to do both easier and harder. "You wanted to show me something?" he asked, straightening as she approached. Without speaking, Mei-lin extended her hand, palm open, revealing the poison vial. Zhou-wei studied it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Shadow lotus extract. Tasteless, odorless, fatal within hours. Quite sophisticated. "You know it?" Mei-lin asked, surprised by his composure. "I know many poisons," Zhou-wei replied, matter-of-factly. "It comes with being a king. One must be prepared for assassination attempts." His dark eyes locked with hers. "Is this why you really came to Tianling?" "Yes," she whispered. "I was going to put it in your wine at the feast. I've spent 8 years planning your death." "And now?" he asked quietly. Mei-lin's throat tightened with shame and confusion. "Now, I don't know what I believe anymore. I don't know who I am if I'm not the daughter seeking vengeance for her father's death." To her amazement, Zhou-wei stepped closer instead of away. "You're a woman brave enough to question everything she's been taught," he said earnestly. "You're someone who can see past hatred, to recognize truth when it's right before her. You're the one who could help heal the wounds between our kingdoms." "How can you be so calm?" Mei-lin asked, bewildered. "I just confessed that I came here to murder you." "Because you didn't," Zhou-wei replied simply. "You had the chance yesterday at the feast. You had another chance when I came to your chambers with tea. You chose not to act. That tells me more about your true character than your original intentions ever could." Tears stung Mei-lin's eyes. "I feel so lost," she whispered. "Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed about right and wrong." "The world is rarely that simple," Zhou-wei said gently. "Heroes and villains belong mostly to stories. The rest of us are just people, trying to make the best choices we can, with imperfect information." He held out his hand, palm up. After a moment's hesitation, Mei-lin placed the poison vial in it. Zhou-wei walked to the edge of the lotus pond and tossed it into the water. It vanished with a small splash, taking with it 8 years of misdirected hatred. "What happens now?" Mei-lin asked softly. "Now, you decide who you want to be," Zhou-wei said. "You can return to Yunhai and tell your brother about the marriage alliance I've proposed. You can choose to accept it or reject it, based on your judgment, not anyone else's agenda." "And if I accept?" she asked. "Then we'll work together to build something better than what our fathers left us," Zhou-wei said, his voice steady with conviction. "It won't be easy. There will be opposition from those who profit from conflict, but I believe we could be partners in more than just politics." The way he said it made her heart race. This man, who had every reason to distrust her, who had just heard her confess to planning his murder, still spoke of partnership, of trust, of alliance. It could have been the greatest political manipulation in history.
or it could be genuine. Her instincts, sharpened by years of court intrigue, told her it was genuine. And more than that, she realized she wanted it to be genuine. Somewhere in the past 2 days, her feelings toward Zhou-wei had transformed completely. The man she had come to kill had become someone she could imagine spending her life beside. "I have one condition," she said decisively. "Name it," Zhou-wei replied, without hesitation. "I want to be directly involved in pursuing justice against those who manipulated us both," she said firmly. "They've caused enough suffering." Zhou-wei smiled, the first truly warm, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him. "I was hoping you'd say that," he admitted with satisfaction. "I have a feeling we're going to make an excellent team, Princess Mei-lin." "Your future queen," she corrected. She was rewarded by the startled pleasure that lit his features. "Are you certain?" Zhou-wei asked, his voice full of hope. "You don't need more time to consider?" Mei-lin thought about it seriously. 2 days ago, she had been consumed with hatred for this man. Now she was agreeing to marry him. By any reasonable measure, it was insane. But the most important decisions are rarely made by reason. They come from a deeper wisdom, the wisdom of the heart. And her heart was telling her that Zhou-wei was a man she could not only live with, but love. "I'm certain," she said confidently. "Though I should warn you, I won't be a quiet, decorative queen. If we're going to be partners, I intend to be an equal partner." "I'd be disappointed with anything less," Zhou-wei replied warmly. Then, with a graceful bow that was somehow both formal and intimate, he added, "My lady, would you do me the honor of walking back to the palace with me? We have a wedding to plan." The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the courtyard between the two kingdoms' border fortresses. It was Zhou-wei's idea, a ceremony conducted on neutral ground to symbolize the equal partnership between Yunhai and Tianling. Representatives from both courts attended, along with hundreds of citizens who had traveled to witness this historic union. Mei-lin wore robes of phoenix red silk, embroidered with golden flames, and Zhou-wei was resplendent in dragon blue with silver scales that caught the morning light. As they exchanged vows before the assembled crowds, she caught sight of familiar faces in the gathering: Grandmother Wu beaming with pride, refugees from the borderlands who had found new hope in this alliance, and soldiers from both armies standing side by side without weapons. "Do you, Mei-lin of Yunhai, take Zhou-wei of Tianling as your husband, to rule beside him in wisdom and strength?" asked the high priest. "I do," Mei-lin replied, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "And I vow to be his partner in all things, in peace and in war, in joy and in sorrow." "Do you, Zhou-wei of Tianling, take Mei-lin of Yunhai as your wife, to rule beside her in wisdom and strength?" the priest continued. "I do," Zhou-wei answered, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "And I vow to be her partner in all things, to honor her counsel and trust in her strength." As they sealed their union with a traditional exchange of jade rings, Mei-lin felt a sense of rightness settle over her, like a warm cloak. This marriage had begun as political necessity, but in the weeks of planning and preparation, she had come to genuinely care for her future husband. His intelligence, his unexpected kindness, and his dedication to his people had won her respect. His gentle humor and the way he listened to her ideas with serious attention had won something deeper. The feast that followed lasted until well past midnight. Musicians from both kingdoms played together, creating new melodies from the combination of their traditions.
Dancers performed ancient stories of phoenixes and dragons, once enemies, now eternal partners in the celestial dance. But the most meaningful moment came when Master Chen, who had traveled from Yunhai for the ceremony, approached the high table during a lull in the festivities. "Your Majesty," he said to Mei-lin, bowing deeply. "I owe you an apology." "Master Chen?" she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I knew," he said, quietly, his weathered face heavy with shame. "Not everything, but I knew that some of the information we gave your father about Tianling's intentions was incomplete. I told myself it was for the good of the kingdom, but I see now that I was wrong." Zhou-wei leaned forward slightly. "What are you saying, honored counselor?" he asked carefully. "I'm saying that I was part of the conspiracy that led to the Eastern campaigns," Master Chen confessed. "Lord Deng and several others convinced me that war was inevitable, that it was better to strike first than wait to be destroyed." Master Chen's voice grew steadier. "They showed me forged documents, staged false intelligence reports. I believed them because I wanted to believe them. It seemed simpler than seeking peaceful solutions." Mei-lin felt a cold anger rising in her chest. "You helped orchestrate the death of my father," she said, her voice sharp as ice. "Yes, Your Majesty," Master Chen admitted. "And I have come to confess my crimes and accept whatever punishment you deem fit." Silence fell over the immediate area as wedding guests nearby turned to listen. Mei-lin looked at this man who had been like a grandfather to her, who had taught her strategy and statecraft, who had helped shape her into the woman she had become. The betrayal cut deep, but she could see the genuine remorse in his eyes. "Your punishment," she said finally, "is to help us root out the remaining conspirators and ensure that such manipulation never again leads our kingdoms into pointless war. You will serve as an advisor to both courts, helping us build the intelligence networks needed to prevent future deceptions." Master Chen's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. "Your Majesty is more merciful than I deserve," he said humbly. "I'm being practical," Mei-lin replied firmly. "Vengeance won't undo the past, but your knowledge and contacts can help us build a better future." Zhou-wei reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently in approval. The gesture sent warmth spreading through her chest, not just from the physical contact, but from the knowledge that her husband truly supported her judgment. The first months of marriage were a delicate dance of learning to work together while building trust between their kingdoms. Mei-lin took up residence in Tianling's palace, but traveled frequently to Yunhai to maintain connections with her birth kingdom. Zhou-wei proved to be as good as his word about treating her as an equal partner. He consulted her on policy decisions, included her in military planning sessions, and supported her initiatives, even when his advisors grumbled about a foreign queen having too much influence. Their first major challenge came when Lord Deng, one of the primary conspirators behind the Eastern campaigns, attempted to raise a rebellion in Yunhai's western provinces. He had been spreading rumors that Mei-lin had been bewitched or coerced into marriage, that Tianling was slowly absorbing Yunhai through treachery rather than conquest. "He's mobilizing 3 regiments of soldiers who remain loyal to the old ways," reported General Han, Zhou-wei's most trusted military advisor. "Our intelligence suggests he plans to march on both capitals simultaneously." "A bold strategy," Zhou-wei mused,
studying the tactical maps spread across the council table. But it requires splitting his forces. If we could coordinate our response. We need to move carefully, Mei-lin interjected. Many of the soldiers following Lord Deng are good men who believe they're protecting Yunhai's independence. If we can capture Lord Deng and expose his lies without excessive bloodshed, we might be able to win over his followers rather than simply defeating them.
You're suggesting we try to turn his own army against him? Asked General Han skeptically. I'm suggesting we give them the truth and let them choose, Mei-lin replied confidently. Most of these men have families in the border regions. They've seen the benefits of our alliance firsthand. If we can make them understand that Lord Deng is the real threat to their loved one's safety. Zhou-wei smiled with obvious pride. My queen, you have a devious mind, he said admiringly. I like this plan. The campaign that followed was unlike any in either kingdom's history. Instead of simply marching armies against Lord Deng's rebels, Mei-lin and Zhou-wei traveled together through the disputed regions, holding public assemblies where they presented evidence of the conspiracy that had led to years of unnecessary war. Former refugees testified about Tianling's generosity. Merchants spoke of increased prosperity from expanded trade. Soldiers from both armies demonstrated their cooperation and mutual respect. Master Chen, true to his promise of redemption, provided detailed testimony about Lord Deng's manipulation of intelligence and his role in orchestrating the conflicts that had cost so many lives. The effect was dramatic. Entire units began defecting from Lord Deng's rebellion, not to join either kingdom's army, but to demand trials for the conspirators who had deceived them. By the time the royal forces cornered Lord Deng in the mountain fortress where he had made his final stand, he commanded fewer than 300 men. Surrender, and you will receive a fair trial, Zhou-wei called out across the valley. Continue this pointless resistance, and you will be responsible for the deaths of men who trusted you. Lord Deng's response was to order an attack. The battle was brief, but fierce. Lord Deng had chosen his ground well, and his remaining followers fought with the desperation of men who believed they were fighting for their homeland's survival. But they were vastly outnumbered by the combined forces of both kingdoms, and their position was ultimately indefensible. When the fortress fell, Lord Deng was found in his private chambers, dead by his own hand rather than face capture. Beside his body lay a detailed confession of his crimes, perhaps his final attempt to find some measure of redemption. It's over, Zhou-wei said, finding Mei-lin on the fortress walls as she watched the last of the rebel soldiers surrender in the courtyard below. This part is over, she agreed thoughtfully, but building a lasting peace will take much longer. Are you having doubts? He asked gently. Mei-lin looked at her husband, for she had come to think of him truly as her husband, not just her political partner. Over the months of working together, her respect and affection had deepened into something she was beginning to recognize as love. Not the passionate, all-consuming love of poets' songs, but something steadier and more precious. The love of two people who had seen each other's strengths and flaws and chosen to build a life together. No doubts about us, she said firmly, but the work ahead will be easier with a partner I trust, Zhou-wei finished. He moved to stand beside her at the wall, close enough that their shoulders touched. Mei-lin, I want you to know that this marriage has become much more to me than a political alliance. What has it become? She asked softly. The foundation of everything I hope to build, Zhou-wei said earnestly. Not just peace between kingdoms, but a partnership that could last our lifetimes. He turned to face her fully. I think I'm falling in love with you. The confession sent joy racing through her heart. Only think?
she teased gently. I know, he corrected with a smile. I'm trying to be diplomatic. Well, stop, Mei-lin said, rising on her toes to kiss him for the first time since their wedding ceremony. Diplomacy is overrated between spouses. 3 years after their wedding, Queen Mei-lin of Tianling stood in the same garden where Zhou-wei had first proposed to her, watching their infant son sleep in the shade of the jasmine vines. Little Wei-lin, named for both his grandfathers, had his mother's delicate features but his father's dark eyes, and already showed signs of the strong will he had inherited from both parents. He's going to be spoiled beyond all reason, Zhou-wei observed, settling onto the bench beside his wife. Between both kingdoms' worth of doting relatives and the fact that you refuse to let the nursemaids handle night feedings, he's a baby. He should be spoiled a little, Mei-lin replied, though she was smiling. There will be time enough for duty and responsibility when he's older. Their son would inherit both thrones when he came of age, uniting the kingdoms permanently under a single ruler. But that was still decades in the future. For now, Yunhai and Tianling remained separate but closely allied realms, their borders open to trade and travel, their armies coordinating against external threats, their people slowly learning to think of each other as neighbors rather than enemies.
The harvest reports from the eastern provinces are excellent this year, Zhou-wei said, settling into the comfortable rhythm of discussing the day's business. Even in private moments like this, they found themselves talking about their kingdoms, not because duty demanded it, but because they genuinely enjoyed working together. Grandmother Wu will be pleased, Mei-lin noted. She's been experimenting with new crop rotations in the refugee settlements. Mei-lin adjusted the baby's blanket as a breeze stirred the garden. Speaking of the eastern provinces, have you made a decision about the new trade route proposal? I want to hear your thoughts first, Zhou-wei replied. The potential profits are enormous, but the environmental impact. They spent the next hour debating the merits of various policy proposals, their conversation weaving seamlessly between matters of state, family concerns, and the small intimacies of married life. It was a pattern they had developed over the years, this blending of public and private that somehow made both stronger. As the sun began to set, painting the garden in shades of gold and crimson, Mei-lin found herself thinking about the girl she had been 3 years ago. That young woman, consumed with hatred and dreams of vengeance, seemed like a stranger now. The poison she had carried in her sleeve had been replaced by something far more powerful: hope for the future and love for the man beside her. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly. The choice to pursue peace instead of victory. Zhou-wei considered the question seriously, as he did all her questions. Do you mean, do I regret not conquering Yunhai when I had the chance? Or do I regret marrying a woman who was plotting to assassinate me? He asked with gentle humor. Either. Both, she said. Never, he said firmly. Military victory would have given me a larger kingdom, but a less stable one. And as for marrying a would-be assassin, he grinned, it keeps life interesting. I was never actually going to go through with it, Mei-lin protested, though she was laughing. I know, Zhou-wei said warmly. That's why I fell in love with you, because when the moment came to choose between vengeance and justice, between hatred and hope, you chose the harder but better path. Their son stirred in his sleep, making the small, mewling sounds that meant he would wake soon and demand feeding. Mei-lin gathered him up, marveling as she always did at the perfect tiny fingers and the impossible softness of his skin. What do you think his life will be like, growing up in a united kingdom, never knowing the fear and hatred that shaped us?
Better than ours, Zhou-wei replied confidently. But perhaps not as interesting. He'll have to find his own challenges, his own purpose. Oh, I think the challenges will find him, Mei-lin said dryly. Royal children never lack for interesting problems to solve.
As summoned by their conversation, a palace messenger appeared at the garden entrance, bowing respectfully before approaching. Your Majesties, forgive the interruption, the messenger said formally. A diplomatic envoy has arrived from the kingdom of Nanshan, requesting audience on a matter of urgent importance. Zhou-wei and Mei-lin exchanged glances. Nanshan was a powerful kingdom to the south, one they had been watching carefully as it expanded its influence through military conquest. What is the nature of their business? Mei-lin asked with authority. They say they come seeking alliance against a common threat, Your Majesty, the messenger reported. The northern barbarians have been raiding across multiple borders, and Nanshan proposes a coordinated military response. Another crisis, another opportunity to test the strength of their partnership and the wisdom of their decisions. Mei-lin felt the familiar stirring of excitement that came with new challenges. Beside her, she could sense Zhou-wei's mind already working through the political implications. Tell the envoys we will receive them in the morning, Zhou-wei decided. Full formal audience in the Hall of Celestial Harmony. And send word to my brother in Yunhai, Mei-lin added decisively. If we're discussing military alliances, he should be involved in the negotiations. As the messenger departed, Mei-lin stood and began walking back toward the palace, her son cradled in her arms. Zhou-wei fell into step beside her, and she marveled again at how natural this had become, this partnership in all things, this balance of personal and political that somehow strengthened both. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine and the distant sounds of the city settling into night. In the borderlands, former enemies now worked side by side in the fields. In the refugee settlements, children who might have grown up as adversaries played together instead. And here, in the heart of what had once been hostile kingdoms, a woman who had come to kill a king walked beside the man who had become her greatest love. Another adventure begins, Zhou-wei observed, his voice warm with anticipation. Indeed, Mei-lin agreed. Are you ready for it? Zhou-wei paused at the palace entrance and turned to face her fully. In the lamplight, she could see the depth of affection in his dark eyes, the quiet satisfaction of a man who had found his true partner in life. With you as my partner, he said, reaching out to gently touch their son's sleeping face, then meeting her eyes with a smile that held both the promise of tomorrow's challenges and the contentment of tonight's peace. I'm ready for anything. As they entered the palace together, the last light of day faded behind them. Hand in hand, they walked toward whatever tomorrow would bring, knowing that together they could face any challenge. Their love had already changed everything.